You look at a ripe tomato and you say it is red. You say that like it is a fact about the tomato, like redness is sitting there on its surface waiting for you to notice it. But here's the thing that really gets me. The thing I find so absolutely fascinating that I have to sit with it for a while before I can move on. That tomato, sitting on your counter right now, in the dark with the lights off, has no color at all. None. Zero. And even in the light, the redness is not on the tomato. It is not anywhere in the room. It is inside your skull. It is a story your brain is telling you. Now, before you push back and say that sounds crazy, let me walk you through what is actually happening, because the physics here is beautiful and a little unsettling. The tomato is made of molecules. Those molecules are arranged in a particular way, and that arrangement means that when light hits the surface, some wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation get absorbed and some get reflected. The tomato absorbs most of the shorter and medium wavelengths and reflects the longer ones, the ones around 700 nanometers. That reflection is a real physical event. It is happening in the world. But that electromagnetic radiation bouncing off the tomato has no color. It is just oscillating electric and magnetic fields traveling through space at a speed that ought to make your head spin. It is energy moving. It has a frequency. It has a wavelength. But it has no redness. Redness is not a property of electromagnetic waves any more than wetness is a property of the number 7. So where does the red come from? That is the right question. That light travels across the room and enters your eye, and the moment it does, something remarkable happens. Inside the back of your eye, you have these photoreceptor cells, and some of them are called cones. You have 3 types of cones. Each type is tuned to respond most strongly to a different range of wavelengths. The first type responds most to longer wavelengths, what we loosely call red. The second responds most to medium wavelengths, around green. The third fires most for shorter wavelengths, around blue. Now here's the key thing. Each of those cone cells does not tell your brain what wavelength of light it detected. It does not send a detailed frequency report up the optic nerve. All it does is send a signal that says how much it is firing. Just a number, an intensity. That is all the information that travels. So your brain receives 3 streams of numbers. Not wavelengths, not colors, just numbers from 3 different populations of cells. And then your brain does something extraordinary with those 3 numbers. It computes a ratio. It compares the activity in one population to the activity in another population to the third. And based on those comparisons, it constructs an experience. And that experience is what you call color. The redness you see when you look at that tomato is the brain's label for a particular pattern of ratios across your 3 cone populations. It is a code word, a tag. Your brain invented it as a way of keeping track of different surface reflectance properties in the world, because that is useful information for a creature that needs to find food and avoid danger. But the label itself, the felt quality of redness, that warm, vivid sensation, there is nothing like that out there in the physical world. That is entirely a product of the neural machinery in your head. I find this genuinely strange when I push on it. Think about what it means. 2 people look at the same tomato. The same wavelengths of light enter both eyes. Similar signals travel up both optic nerves. Similar patterns of neural activity fire in both visual cortices. And both people say it looks red. But is their inner experience of red identical? You cannot actually check. You cannot step inside someone else's experience and compare notes. The physics is the same on the outside. What it feels like on the inside, nobody can say for certain. Now let me take this further, because I think most people stop at the cone cells and miss something even more interesting. Your brain does not just passively receive those signals from the cones. It actively interprets them based on context. This is where the physics and the neuroscience get genuinely wild. Consider what happens with a piece of white paper. In the afternoon under sunlight, the paper reflects a lot of light across all wavelengths, and your brain correctly calls it white. Now you take that same paper indoors under a tungsten lamp. A tungsten lamp puts out much more of the longer wavelengths than sunlight does. So the actual physical light bouncing off the paper and entering your eye is now yellower, more orange, more shifted toward the red end of the spectrum compared to what it was outside. The numbers your cone cells are sending to your brain have genuinely changed, but you still see the paper as white. It still looks white to you. How? Your brain is doing a calculation that no simple camera can do automatically. It is estimating the color of the illuminating light source and subtracting it out. It is saying, look, I know the ambient light in this room is on the warm yellowish side, so I will adjust my perception of every surface in the room accordingly. This is called color constancy. And what it means is that the color you see is not even a straightforward function of the light entering your eye. It is a corrected, interpreted, context-dependent construction. Your brain is not a recording device. It is building a model of the world, and color is part of that model, not part of the world itself. There is a famous example of this with a photograph that circulated years ago of a dress. Some people saw it as blue and black. Others saw it as white and gold. Same photograph, same pixels on the screen, same wavelengths entering different eyes. But people disagreed completely about the colors. And what was happening was that different people's brains were making different assumptions about the lighting conditions under which the photograph had been taken. If your brain assumed the dress was in shadow and therefore compensating for cool bluish shadow light, you saw it one way. If your brain assumed it was under direct bright light, you saw it another way. Neither perception was wrong in some absolute sense. Both were the result of perfectly normal visual processing, making different contextual assumptions. It just exposed, rather dramatically, how much of what you see is a construction and not a detection. Now step back with me for a moment and think about what colors are for, because I think that is the most illuminating angle on all of this. Evolution built the color vision system. It did not build it to give organisms an accurate measurement instrument for electromagnetic frequency. It built it because distinguishing the spectral properties of surfaces is useful. It helps you tell a ripe fruit from an unripe one. It helps you notice a predator whose coat does not quite match the foliage. It helps you read the emotional signals in another person's face when blood moves toward or away from the skin. Color vision is a tool shaped by survival pressure, not a spectrometer. So the fact that it does not give you a literal readout of physical wavelengths should not be surprising. It was never supposed to. It was supposed to be useful, and it is. It is just not what you thought it was. Different animals have solved the color problem differently, and that is another piece of evidence that color is a neural invention rather than a property of the world. A dog has only 2 types of cone cells. Its color space is much simpler than yours. The world it sees is not less real, but its color labels are completely different, covering a different space of distinctions. A mantis shrimp has 16 types of cone cells. 16, compared to your 3. Does the mantis shrimp see more colors than you do? The answer turns out to be complicated and fascinating. It may actually process those 16 channels in a very different way than you might expect, possibly using them not for finer color discrimination, but for faster color categorization. But the point stands that its color experience, whatever it is, cannot possibly be the same as yours. Its neural machinery is different. Its color labels are different. The shrimp and the dog, and you are all looking at the same electromagnetic spectrum, but you are each living in a different color world. Those worlds are not out there in the physics. They are in the heads of the creatures doing the looking. Here's a thought that I really like. Imagine a species that evolved with photoreceptors sensitive to radio waves, or X-rays. They would see colors across that portion of the spectrum, totally alien to us, but just as real to them as red and blue are to you. The physics of electromagnetic radiation does not privilege any particular slice of frequencies. The spectrum goes from radio waves at the long end through microwaves, through infrared, through visible light, through ultraviolet, through X-rays, through gamma rays. It is one continuous thing. We happen to see a narrow little slice of it, the part that the sun puts out most intensely, the part that passes through Earth's atmosphere relatively cleanly. We see that slice not because it is special in some cosmic sense, but because that is the slice that happened to be useful for creatures evolving on this particular planet under this particular star. And even within that narrow slice, the color names you use depend on the language you grew up speaking. There is good evidence that the boundaries between colors, the exact places where you decide that this shade counts as blue and that one counts as green, those boundaries are shaped by the color vocabulary you learned. Languages divide the spectrum differently. Some languages have a single word for what English speakers call blue and green. Speakers of those languages, in certain experimental tasks, are slower to distinguish between blue and green samples than English speakers are. The linguistic category influences the perceptual category. That does not mean the physics changes. The wavelengths are the same, but the salience of the distinction, the speed with which the brain flags it as significant, That depends on what labels the brain has been trained to apply. So we have this chain now. At one end, you have electromagnetic radiation with a physical frequency, a wavelength, an energy that is real, measurable, independent of any observer. Then the radiation hits a material surface, and the surface reflects some frequencies more than others. That reflectance pattern is also real, measurable, physical. The light that reaches your eye carries information about that reflectance, also real and physical. But then the light enters your eye and sets off a cascade of neural events. And somewhere in that cascade, the physics of the world gets translated into the phenomenology of experience. Wavelengths become colors. Pressure waves in air become sounds. Chemical concentration gradients become smells. The translation happens inside the nervous system. And the result of the translation, the color, the sound, the smell, those are mental events, not physical ones. Now somebody might say, all right, but does it matter? The tomato is still red in any practical sense. You and I will still agree that it is red. We can still talk about it, point to it, use the word without confusion. Does the philosophical point change anything? And my answer to that is, yes, I think it does matter, but not in a way that should make you depressed about reality. It should do the opposite. It should make reality more interesting to you. What it tells you is that the brain is doing something remarkable. It is taking raw sensory data, 3 numbers from 3 populations of cone cells, and constructing a vivid, stable, informative, and beautiful representation of surface properties in the world. It does this in real time, constantly, without any conscious effort on your part. The colors you see are the end product of an enormously sophisticated neural computation that evolution took hundreds of millions of years to refine. That is not nothing. That is actually astonishing. And it tells you something else, something I find genuinely important for thinking clearly about the world. The world as it appears to you is always a model. It is always a construction, not a hallucination, not an illusion in the cheap sense, but a representation built by your nervous system for the purpose of guiding behavior. And like all representations, it captures some things about reality faithfully and leaves other things out or transforms them. The colors in your visual experience are a transformed representation of spectral reflectance properties. They are useful, they track something real, but they are not the underlying thing itself. When I think about color this way, I feel like the tomato on the counter has gotten more interesting, not less. The redness that seems so obvious and simple and just there, it turns out to be the result of a chain of physical events, a scattering of photons, and absorption by rhodopsin molecules in cone cells, a cascade of ion channel openings and closings, a computation across millions of neurons, all happening in a fraction of a second, all for the purpose of producing that simple, clear signal in your mind. That feels like a bigger and more wonderful story than the alternative. And the alternative is just that things are colored the way they look, which would be fine, I suppose, but less wonderful. And I have always preferred wonderful.